And how Pittsburgh, if you turn on the news, they love fires.
They love
news coverage is always fires.
Well, have you heard, dude? It's all about exploding houses now.
I am a composer, producer, songwriter based here in Nashville. I have an Emmy, tons of placements. I've been doing this for quite a while. We thought about doing this, and I'm like, awesome, but we did this instead. And it's like,
oh, great, it's boring now. They were like, are you aware that like it's clipping? And he goes, oh yeah, I know. Whenever it clips, it feels sick, right?
What do you find is like the most consistent thing that people are struggling with?
I think the most consistent thing that people struggle with is
And welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I am your host, Drew, here with my co-host, Josh. Josh, how are we doing today on this fine day?
I'm doing great. It is beautiful down here in Atlanta. I have the door open so I can hear the sounds of the city, and I'm excited to speak with everybody today.
Yeah. And by everybody, today, he means we have guest Mike Meiers of Songwriting for Guitar. Not that Mike Meiers, the other Mike Meiers.
not a serial killer, not the Canadian,
as far
the
as
other
we know.
one.
Yeah, as far as we know. The dude, the one from Pittsburgh, right? The guy from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Yes, the one that the yin from Yinsburg.
The yin from Yinsburg. Jeez. Dude, Mike, thanks so much for coming on. We've been trying to get you on for a little bit. And yeah, super excited to talk about all things that your guys got going over there, guys and ladies got going on over there at Songwriting for Guitar. Yeah. And but maybe like to start it out for people who don't know who you are, what you do, all that kind of stuff. Why don't you give them the short and sweet of it off the top?
Short and sweet. I am a composer, producer, songwriter based here in Nashville. I have an Emmy, tons of placements. I've been doing this for quite a while. And then in 2019, at the end of it, I founded Songwriting for Guitar, which started just to inform people how to use their guitar to write better songs. And over time, it's grown into a coaching hub in which I have many different coaches focusing on mixing, production, top lining, lyrical development, DAW 101. If you want to get into the licensing world, we connect you with the right coach, especially coaches that are doing it. That's their main thing too. That is their job, so that you can get real experience. So if you're interested in the idea of monetizing this, whether it be the side hustle, the front hustle, the amount of hustle that you want to do, that we pair you with the right coach, because the music business is an interesting business. It is ever changing, ever shaping, and it's hard to figure it out by yourself.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier when you have a guide and you have someone that's been doing it. And if they can help you avoid some of the mistakes that we've all made several times, that is absolutely what our goal is.
Yep.
For sure. Well, yeah. I'm stoked to have you on because there's a lot of, I mean, guitar wise, Josh could probably talk your ear off for hours about nerdy guitar shit.
That's right.
But
I'm
then
all for that.
also there's also the fact of like more sync conversations. That's been a very interesting conversation. We've had a couple other people to talk about sync, but I'd love from your perspective of somebody who's getting more high level placements on like an Emmy level and that kind of stuff, to pick your brain about some of that kind of stuff and maybe entry level things as well. But I think maybe to start, let's get your journey up until now, because I'd love for people to give some context from like how you got started and, you know, learning music and guitar and teaching and this whole like music production stuff, and then how you kind of got to where you are now out in Nashville.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think it's funny because when you say it, it's like, that's a lot of things, but it's kind of cool to think the progression started with like one thing. And then it just kind of got to a level where it was able to stand on its own. Then I could do the other thing. But for me, I music was always plan A. There was never a plan B.
Yeah.
There was never like, this is my alternative. And my parents made me go to college for like a hot minute. And then I was like, I just stopped going. And I was like, just stop. Just let me do this thing and figure it out. And I was in a slew of terrible bands, awful bands.
Yeah.
And worked the
As
weird
we all
jobs. Oh, I know. We look back and we're like, man, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
and working the weird jobs to support the thing that you wanted to do. And then eventually I had a moderate, slightly not bad band that did good, and we were able to do tours that broke even, open for some moderate bands that were kind of in our scene, like Hello Goodbye, the Rocket Summer, things that were kind of like in a mid-level. People knew them.
Yeah.
And there was a crowd. So
You're in that
it was
emo pop, like
pop punk. That was
pop punk.
our thing,
band
where
were
we
you
were
in?
like
Neon.
So it was called My Cardboard Spaceship Adventure. We were kind of like think of like Motion City Soundtrack, Reliant K kind of style, where we were friendly to all. So it was like we could easily blend in a bill. So either you remember or forget us. It depends on which one, how much blending we were doing.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was awesome. But with a band, there's turnover. People leave, then you gotta get in the new members. And after a while, I got tired and ended up just kind of thinking, well, maybe that was my thing with music. And I slowly settled into teaching in Pittsburgh at a school that was just starting. And I thought, man, I don't know if I'm going to like teaching, but I ended up loving it purely because it forced me to listen to lots of music consistently, things that was totally out of my comfort zone. I was teaching a whole bunch of like top 40 songs, things that were super, super current that I used to be like, oh, I'll never listen. And then suddenly listening consistently and loving. And then maybe about 5 years in, I was like, man, I want to get back into songwriting. I really, and I don't know, I was watching TV and I was like, I could write some of these songs. And then part of me is like, well, why aren't you? Well, because you don't know how to enter that industry. You are completely clueless. So you better start. And so that started a whole journey of taking courses, signing up for mentorships, and just totally binging on, I know nothing, go to the people that are doing it and start learning from them, and just assume that you're going to make tons of mistakes, learn from them, and just be committed to this. If you're going to do it, don't just stick your toe in, just be 100% committed. And that means you're going to financially invest in it. You're not going to worry about what other people say that maybe you don't understand, and you're just going to stay focused. And it took a bit, but then the gears started turning. You get that first little placement, then you get another one. And that's where I got into music production, because I would work with some people and the productions were okay, but I was like, I bet I could do better. Or it's like, I heard a thing. I know it sounds crazy. It's like, I hear a thing in my head. Let me get it out. And at first I thought it was just going to be to show them what I was thinking. And they were like, oh, I just threw it in. Okay. So then to me, it was like, well, then spend some time building that. So each time as I built a layer and it started to get stable, like I understood writing, then I could get to, okay, let's start to tackle some of the production stuff. Okay, I'm getting better with the production stuff. I can move to the vocal production. And so those steps kind of built layers over time that I was able to create a thing that was sustainable. Left my job, which was scary, but I was like, I got to do it. And then started my own thing, just teaching on the side, just songwriters. Because I noticed consistently a lot of songwriter friends of mine would be like, hey, could you show me that thing that you do on the guitar that caused us to write the thing? I was like, yeah, sure. And before I knew it, I realized my entire clientele was nothing but songwriters. And my time was starting to fill up. And I was like, how about I create this course? And, I don't know anything about this world. I don't know how to start a company. I'm clueless in this. So it was a whole other, just like stepping into something that was completely new, and then loving it. It grew. You build a community, you got hundreds of people in there. And then I started to bring in people that were co-writers of mine with very specific skill sets that could speak to a different part of my audience that I couldn't. Like, I can't tell you about like top lining for a living. I do the production side. I help write the songs, but I'm not singing on it. I'm not going through. I'm not bad at mixing, but I probably am not the go-to guy that's going to tell you. But I do have a friend who mentored me in my production journey that was way better to bring in. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And the company's grown. And so it's kind of, I have a couple of different hats, but I can, because I was patient with myself, I guess, where each step along the way, I allowed my focus to be on that particular thing. And I didn't move until it was started to be developed to a level where it could be sustainable.
100%. I think it's super interesting that you attempted the school thing, and then ultimately decided to not do school but ended up teaching anyway, which
It
is
is
like
funny.
a stark opposite to my story, which is like I went to college to teach music.
Hmm.
I was there for 2.5 years,
Yeah.
and I loved my music classes, but what really turned me off from it were the teaching classes. But I have to say that it is probably because I got inundated with teaching from a state mandated situation.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? When you have to follow these guidelines and you have to follow these like structures that like in a traditional school, like, you know, if I'm going to be a middle school band teacher, like you have to
Yeah.
follow these like certain guidelines and structures that are mandated by each state. And learning all of that and having to deal with all that is like, honestly, for people like us that are creative brains, like it doesn't gel like at
Yeah.
all.
Did you graduate, Drew?
I didn't.
You didn't?
I stopped. I
Did you
was
get to the
not.
part where you have to like learn how to play all the instruments?
Yes, I did get to that part.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I would kill
that
to see you playing a tuba. That would be
that
fire.
part, I had to. Well, I was a brass major, so it was easy to do.
Oh, that's
You were a
awesome.
Yeah,
brass
so
major?
I was brass. So
Whoa.
I was trumpet, and then you can learn like tuba is basically the same thing, just reverse fingerings. Trombone was the hardest one because positions are different.
Do you still
Uh,
play?
I track a lot of trumpet. Uh, for people
I
actually.
like how you're just figuring
Yeah,
this. Your mind's. You're like, what?
I was like, why aren't you doing horns for people? And you are, and you didn't tell me?
So there's a really good example, Josh, of a song. You remember Matthew Parker
Yeah.
we had on? He and I co-produced a song together. It was called "Lay Low," and it was like very Spanish inspired. I played every trumpet on that song. It's cool, like little pop
Yeah.
Camila Cabello kind of vibe
Yeah.
song.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it worked super well to have like raw trumpet solos on that.
No, I'm pissed.
Um,
I
but back to the point, like that was super helpful. Being able
Yeah.
to learn like all of those instruments was super helpful for me, but I hated the teaching aspect. But what I found is now coming back to it and like doing this podcast, I'm creating content around more educational style content, is that I do like teaching. I just don't like teaching when it's like, hey, you have to follow this exact framework that actually doesn't help you learn a lot. And I find it very interesting that you found yourself there in a similar way that I found myself there, just obviously a lot quicker. And I think the thing that did damage to me was taking the more traditional teaching school route that kind of like made me think I wasn't
yeah,
going to be a
I
teacher.
agree.
I think more people are apt to teach maybe
Mm-hmm.
than they would let on if they tried it and maybe didn't have the hindrance of traditional schooling.
Right. Yeah, I feel that way with like my percussion students, right? Like
Yeah. So Josh teaches percussion students.
yeah, like I used to have to teach out of a book and it just
I
sucked.
hated books.
I
I
know,
never
it's
pulled in a
terrible.
book.
But then like it's also hard because like I don't have the best handwriting. So it's like there gets to a point where it's like I need to start notating all this and I'm terrible with notation software. It's like the bane
Yeah.
of my existence. But what I started doing is so like if I get a new student, like for the first month, like there's no book. And sometimes
That's
for the
perfect.
first few months, you know, I've been teaching this kid for I guess over a year now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like we just got onto our first book. But it was cool because I was able to jump to one of the fun ones, you know, because all of the fundamentals are down, you know. And plus like a lot of kids just straight up get bored, you know, with a book. Or it's super repetitive and it's like, oh cool, we were on this book for a week, 2 weeks, you know. And so
Yeah.
it was really like once I started doing that, I felt like I started seeing way more progress than I had with any of my other students before.
I think it's
you
because
know?
we know humans aren't books. Like it's written a particular way,
Yeah.
and every single person sees something different. They experience things different. And so what might speak to one person is not necessarily going to be the way that speaks to someone else.
Yeah.
And people who are great at teaching, and it's probably why you're connecting back to it, Drew and Josh, you're able to connect with them the entire year with no book, is because you're looking more at the individual and
Yeah.
seeing them and being like, oh, okay, this is going to speak to you.
Yeah.
this is gonna trigger the things that where I want you to go. Where this book, I don't know, this book is gonna be like the start of your left hand, a paradiddle is the right, and
Yeah.
it's just like
And I will say his reading isn't as good because, we spent a year without a proper book. So like some notation stuff was kind of confusing to him, but he was able to pick it up so much faster because he was already in it for so long.
He also
You
understood the
know.
context,
Yeah.
which I actually think is
yeah.
extremely important
Yeah.
as contextual reading.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of the books are just so, especially with percussion music, dude. It'll
Mhm.
literally just be the dumbest things. Like, oh, it's the super popular book. It's not Hal Leonard. It's the other one, Alfred's. The book one
Alfred.
percussion sucks, dude. It is so bad. Like they're like, here's a solo, and then nothing repeats in the entire thing, and it's like that's not how music is played. Like it's not like this is not an accurate
Be
representation.
sure to tag Alfred in this post right
Yeah,
here.
yeah, Alfred. No, like this isn't even about like
Josh is coming for you.
because it's trash. And like every single time, like I've tried to get a kid to like play one of the bigger sections
Yeah.
in that, they're just like, "This sucks," and I'm like, "I know. We should probably get you actual music to play."
It's interesting because a lot of things are they are well intentioned to get them started, but some of the real things that we deal on a daily basis with playing and creating are things that are sometimes not things that we can write down. Like for instance, if I said, "Oh, that note feels really sad." What do you mean that feels really sad? Or it's like
How do you write
that
that?
feels yeah, it's like this feels kind of like I don't know, kind of melancholy. It feels like a tension scene. What the hell does that mean? It's just like I'm looking in a book trying to be like, what the hell's a tension scene? What's a tension? We don't know because it's until we get into the process of creating it and we see what it's like and the nuts and bolts of it, do we start to have some comprehension of the bigger picture of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get someone on board with that first with a book, but if we
Yeah.
can meet them in the middle somewhere and find some connection, especially when I would teach like kids, it's like, what do you like to listen to? Let's just start there. Cool. Let's just like what do you think? How do you think it goes? Like and slowly start building that bridge to bigger concepts over time. Um,
I would love to hear how, because you mentioned a little bit in like your backstory that you
mhm.
started your teaching, and then that kind of led you into the sync world, which I
Yeah,
find very interesting that was your trajectory. I would love to hear that story from you on how that happened, because I feel like that's an interesting like road to that.
it is. Now that you're saying that, I'm like, oh, I guess for me, it was what was wonderful about at the level that I was teaching pretty much like 5 to 6 days a week, at least like 5 to 6 hours. So that's pretty much straight through, or
Yeah.
maybe one break. But I was teaching tons of songs, like tons of songs that were very, very popular, different styles. So for the first 5 years, it was a small like education for me on modern song structures and different voicings and different versions and different techniques and different things unlock certain genres and certain styles.
Yeah.
And it was just literally for 5 years straight and not even thinking about it. That was my job to get paid. And it was amazing. And so when I sat down and started to think about like, well, I do want to do some of this, and I started to want to create a style that was similar like this in a writing sense, I would grab my guitar and pull some of the elements from what I've learned in the past 5 years. And it suddenly this style was unlocked. And if I was in another writing session, we wanted to write such and such song. This is going to, so if I use this particular voicing, this particular strumming pattern, this particular technique, it's going to get me this. Cool. And they would be like, well, how'd you get us there? And I realized my teaching journey was essentially just a schooling in just
That's
like
a really
understanding better
interesting
skull.
approach. I
Yeah.
like that because I feel like that's something that everybody deals with, but it's never really taught that way. Like it's always like, oh, like intro to rock guitar, and it's just like
Mm-hmm.
cowboy chords and power chords, and then and pentatonic scales, and then like then there's like the whole thing where, you know, like jazz and funk are like a separate thing, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you're kind of like breaking it down a step further, because I was literally just running into this the other day. There's this artist named Mickey that like I really, really like right now. And
Mhm.
dude, it sounds like everything that he does like came straight out of the 80s with like a little bit more interesting production. And like some of the guitar parts, I'm like kicking myself. I'm like, you know, my dad was right, man. I should have learned more classic rock when I was a kid, because like I'm like sitting there and I'm like, what's he playing? How do you think of that? Why do you do that? You know, and it's like I should have just learned how to play Pink
That's an
Floyd,
intriguing,
you know?
like, that's the thing too. If we were in a lesson, if somebody said that, I really like that, I'd be like, this is where it got into cool conversations with students where I'd be like, oh, why do you say that? Like, what do you mean you like it? And why I like the play. Well, let's listen. What do you think it is? And then that's where we did like deep dive, active listening.
Mhm.
We would dive into the tracks. And that's what got me interested into the production side, because after you hear the same song that you've been teaching, let's say like by the 8th time or the 20th time,
Yeah.
I didn't want to seem disinterested to the student. So if this was new to them, I didn't want to be like, I've taught never, getting back together a billion mother loving times.
Yeah.
I just forced myself to listen to something else in the song. And I'd be like,
Interesting.
oh, it's this. I didn't listen to the bass before. Oh, damn. I didn't even understand. Or if they were that good that they got the chords and we got it down, I'd be like, let's pick apart the melody and see if we can play it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's when I started to dissect. And I was like, melodies are incredibly simple, but they're mixing it up with variations so that to the ear, we're like constantly surprised. And that's where like hooks started to be like my mind just exploded to seeing like, oh yeah, it's 4 notes, but look at what they did with it.
Yeah.
Now try to do that yourself. And so those were challenges in my early stages of writing, for sync, which were awful. I've got a hard drive full of terrible songs that I'll never show anyone, because they were it was me figuring it out, trying to make something that was like it, and it sounded bad, but I stayed with it and kept on listening. And then, by the next 100 songs, it evolved to something that started to develop a framework. But
I know you teach this for people too. So I would love to hear how you started landing your first placements, because I feel like every sync person is slightly different nowadays, because the world of sync has like gotten so more accessible. At least it's still like there's a little bit of mystery kind of around it, and like there's a little bit of gatekeeping from like an industry level, I would say, in some capacity. But I would love to hear I feel like you're getting weirder and weirder stories nowadays of people just like falling into it in some capacity, So I would love to hear how you kind of went into that and got placed. And
it's interesting too, because when I started like this journey, like from 2016 or so, it was kind of known, but it was still something that was very it's been a thing that was just going on. But I was never told that was a viable thing to do in music, or told that you could do this. I didn't know that was a thing. So when I started to take like a class, a course, and they did like a live event, it was only like a half-day event in LA. I was like sold, booked a ticket to LA. I was like, I'm going there for the weekend. I'm going to go to LA and see what it's like. And through that, I met one library owner I just kind of connected with. And she was super nice. And she was like, yeah, send me stuff. And so I sent stuff and didn't hear anything, literally anything. And I was like, well, I guess she hates my music and everything that I'm doing is shit. And I think that's like everybody thinks that, because I didn't comprehend, like, she's getting 300 songs a day. She doesn't hate you. Her time is very limited. She doesn't have time to respond, hey, Mike, I got the song. Don't worry, I'll listen. Because her day is inundated with 300 songs 5 days a week, even on the weekend. So she's catching up and she has to. So the thing was, I just kept on creating stuff. So the year goes by, I don't hear anything. And then I get an email from her saying, hey, I just wanted to let you know this song is going to be used in this show. Just wanted to confirm that it was One Stop. And I was like, yes, it is. I give, 100% thumbs up, all good. And then I got placed. And so that it was literally just a surprise of an email, and just like, she didn't hate it. And it's like, it was a
Yeah,
validation of
yeah.
like, she didn't think I sucked. But what was also satisfying was I didn't allow my disappointment to stop me from creating more music.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the mistake people make is they're not getting the responses they want. And it's not that they don't like it. They just don't have the time. And even if they like it, they're not going to tell you, hey, I liked it. I put it off to the side. I'll remember you forever. They're just putting it off into whatever categories and systems they
Yeah.
have, that when the need comes up and if you've done the work, it will show up. You will get
Yeah.
noticed.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
there's something to be said to that consistency factor for like a lot of things, right? I feel like if it's
Mhm.
content, podcasting, you know, songwriting,
Yeah.
sync work, it's like, to be real, your first 100 are probably going to be pretty bad.
Awful.
And I mean, if you're lucky, your first 50 or where you
Mhm.
start to get good, right? And so it's not that it's that you're still learning. It's not that well, some of it is that you are just bad and you need to get better. But at the same time, like maybe it's a not yet thing, but she can't just tell you
I
that.
love that. It's that you're not, kind of what you said. It's a learning thing, and I think we forget this. Like when we're kids in school, we're so used to learning because, of course, we don't know the alphabet. We look in, we're like, "What the fuck is this?" It's
But
just like, this is gibberish.
we're also used to instant feedback, positive, negative.
Yeah. Yep.
We're
Mhm.
not used to, I'm going to blurt an answer and then 3 days later I'm going to get a response to that answer.
And we're not used to all of that, and we're also not used to. It's the reframing of what we think failure might be. Like if somebody goes like, "Oh, they didn't like it." Yeah, that's not the interesting question. The interesting question is, what did you learn from it? Like, did you get anything out of that? There's a book I always reference. I love. It's called The Gap in the Gain, and it's basically the reframing. It's like I could go back and I always think of that. Like before I go, like this. Did I get anything? What is the takeaway?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for all of those 100 songs, there's tons of takeaways that I got. That it was like, yeah, it didn't hit the mark. I got people that were like, yeah, this course, but your course didn't hit. What do you mean it didn't hit? Oh, I just, I didn't set it up.
Yeah.
I just stumbled into it. And then you were just like, I guess this is the chorus.
Yeah. Well, and there's no way to know that without doing it, because it's such a feel thing a lot of the time, right? I can tell you how to set up a course all day, but until you've gone through the process of building that track yourself and like working on that thing yourself, it is really hard to explain the feeling of nailing a good pre-chorus transition into a chorus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I feel like there's also this thing where like you spend so much, like music takes a long time to get like good at, so you spend years getting good, and then finally you like come up with something that sounds like good enough, and you're like, oh cool, this means I could do the thing. But then you're like almost surprised that it's not working, or like the songs aren't getting placed, or like the people didn't like your productions, or like whatever. And it's really just because you don't have enough repetition yet. And a lot of times there's just somebody who's simply better, and that's fine. I just heard a big mastering engineer talking about how he lost like the biggest gig of his life to like another mastering engineer that he personally knows. And he was like, yeah, I heard his work. He just did a much better job than me.
But how cool is it to get in that place to know that and be okay with that?
Yeah, and it's like that's the only way that you can really move forward in music is if you understand that, like, of course, like someone's going to be better than you, and that's fine.
But that's such a mindset thing too, and I think that's the other thing about music that's so huge that people miss. That I just got, especially like the books that we're talking about, like Gap in the Game, is like personal development and just like mindset. It is so important because if you don't get that right, everything is going to be so defeatist, and so it's just like you're just going to be
a lot of that
dragging yourself.
Is people pinning their self-worth to their musical ability, and not having their own definition of self-worth outside of music. And I think a lot of that is that it's like, oh, I am a I am a mastering engineer. So this guy that Josh was talking about is like, I'm a mastering engineer. If he pinned his entire self-worth and existence on the fact that I am the best mastering engineer for every job, he'd have gotten pissed about the fact that somebody beat him over another thing, instead of having the self-confidence and being like, yeah, he was just better than me, and that's okay. I'm gonna probably be better than him on some other project,
Yeah.
and that's also okay.
The only thing that you could do is make sure that
Yeah.
you treat every project like, you know, the A&R is going to hire their best friend to try to beat you, you know? And it's like, that's really all it
Ooh.
is. Like, as long as you do your best, then, like, you know, you can't even be upset about it.
It's doing your best and just like being a good hang. Like, were
Yeah.
you decent? Because maybe, yeah, you don't get the job. Maybe it's just like they pass you over.
Yeah.
But then for some reason, like a year later, they're like, I met so and so at this thing. Remember we were talking about they were super nice, and I listened, it wasn't bad. I think he'd be a really good, because you're either going to get yes, no, I know someone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, those are great answers. I love those.
Yeah.
Those are my favorite.
Yeah. Yes. You get confirmation. No, you get a learning experience. And I know someone. It's another potential of the other two.
Exactly. That's what I love about it. It's just very, and just use them, and more or less, do you still enjoy doing it? If you do, that's a clear indication you're going to be okay, because you have to enjoy it, because at $0, the process looks like this. At $100, process looks at $5,000. The process looks like this.
Yeah.
Do you love it or do you hate it?
Yeah. And there's still a lot of no's to be dealing with,
Oh, yeah.
regardless of the price point. So I would love to hear now, talking into the songwriting for guitar stuff, kind of moving into that stuff
Yeah.
for you. So what are some of do you have multiple courses? Do you have a flagship? Is there like kind of kind of maybe go over like what your catalog looks like for people that are interested in some of that?
Yeah, so our flagship course, the one that started it all, is just called Guitar Essentials for the Modern Songwriter. And that is just, to me, the core essentials of any songwriter that, regardless if you consider yourself a guitarist, because that was the thing I'd always hear people, I'm a songwriter, not a guitarist. And it's like, if you've got a guitar, you're wearing it, you're bringing it into the room, you're holding it in your hands, I've got terrible news. You've accepted that responsibility. It's up to you to be that guitarist. But the problem is there's so much information. What confuses people is it's overwhelming. So let's boil it down to the things that are important, essential to just crafting great songs. And if you can understand that and utilize that, it will always move you in the direction. It's still the same stuff that I use now. It's still the things that I use for, leading and co-writes. It's still the things that I look to when someone gives me a song and they go, I've gotten feedback that isn't working. I'm looking for some of those things. So that to me is still the signature course. We have another one that's called Insider's Track, which is our membership that is purely based on just writing better songs. We touch a lot on licensing, but we touch a ton on song structure and melodic elements that people need to focus on, especially if they're trying. Anytime that you put money to something and you say, I want to make some money from this, there are rules. There are some standards you've got to abide by. And so we have tons of modules where sometimes I'll build a track out live and I'll just walk them through. Here's why I'm doing it. Madeline Finn, who does a lot of the top line, she does great breakdowns on vocal development, because that's the thing that I know I need constant refining and always need to sprucing up my catalog and understand what's working in vocal top lining, because I also want my guitar hooks to be a little bit of that as well.
Yeah. Well,
and then
you have people like Polyphia and like some of these prog guys that are like essentially writing pop melodics over these shredded guitar things that are writing honestly some of the coolest hooks I've heard in that type of genre. And it's like, oh yeah, well, they listen to a ton of pop music and replicate a ton of pop melodies. They understand the top lining aspect better than I would argue a lot of producers do.
It's super important. And so that's one of our memberships. And then the main thing is just coaching and mentorship. that's a big thing that we do. I only know because that was huge in my development. Like without that big thing, there are mentors along the way that I spent tons of time with that I paid for because they were at a level that I'm like, you're doing what I want to do. How do I do this? And being a part of that process, watching them and getting feedback on what was working, but also them giving me very specific things that they could pinpoint and be like, work on this and come back to me.
Yeah.
And knowing that I could do that, a very specific thing, because when you're in this world, it's all overwhelming at 1st. And even when you're in it for a little bit, there's something new that pops up. Instagram, gives you this thing, and then you're deep diving on you. You're just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it's paralyzing. So if you can have a third party look into your world, ask you very specific questions, can see that you're lacking framework here and here, and help you develop that so that you can be to a level to not only gain more confidence, but be in a better position had you tried to do this on your own, which may have taken much longer. And there is such a thing as doing a lot of the wrong thing. And sometimes that can be tough to see. But if we can prevent that and actually give you some framework to not have that happen. So the things that you say are important, because when people make this decision, they want to do this because, they went to school, or maybe they did a career that they just weren't crazy about. And music has always been the thing. And it's like, I know that feeling of like working somewhere and being like, ooh, I'm curious about getting back into this. It's scary. It's intimidating, but it's very satisfying when you have all those small wins over time. And you guys know where you get those moments where you're just like, it's almost like, yes, like it has verified that you are on the right track, that things are moving in a way that you feel more excited about, which gives you momentum to go after bigger things. That is the goal of our coaching. And that's what I love, because I didn't want to leave teaching behind.
Yeah.
I didn't want teaching to be a thing. I was so grateful for teaching to open a door that allowed me to do the things that I do, that I'm like, I want people to understand what's working, what's not working, and how can we put them in a better position.
Yeah. It's also cool that it's like very individualized, Sorry, I'm just like digging in my eye. My allergies
You dig
are
into
crazy. Yeah.
No, it has to be, I think, a little bit individualized, because not everybody, we do have courses, but not everyone's the same.
It very much depends on like where these people are, It's like before I moved to Atlanta, like I thought I was really good, right? And it's like at the end of the day, like I was probably like a Pittsburgh 7, on a good day. And then I get to Atlanta, and then like, I'm working with like Lee, and I'm like, man, I kind of suck. I kind of suck a lot, And it's insane like how much better you get just from working with other people. So if you don't have like a ton of outside sources, like if you're in the middle of nowhere, Idaho, and like you don't come from like a musical family, or like you don't have friends that are in it, and like you don't know what to do, like like you need some form of context, because like if you're just searching through like Google results or YouTube, like a lot of it is just, oh, do this, do that, or like my uncle says that you should do this, and it's like it's never like that. It's never like that.
It's interesting. I'm still laughing. Pittsburgh 7. You could be a Pittsburgh 8. You
Thanks,
could be
man.
good. It's
Thanks, man.
You can get that up.
Yeah, no, you didn't hear my mixes from 2 years ago, but
my thought is, we had a group listening session, and one of them said, what chord did you choose? And I said, well, it was a it was a minor chord, our chorus started. And he goes, why did you start your chorus on a minor chord? I heard minor chords are bad for choruses. And I was like, who said that? And I was like, well, what's the emotional tone that you're trying to go for, and what's the lyrical content, and what is the purpose of the song? And he was like, oh, I didn't think of that. He was just going off of hearsay, what somebody said. One-on-one, you can really dive into intention and framework, and what are you trying to do, and the types of songs. And it was just interesting. I was like, it's not the rule for all choruses.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
every single chorus has to be a major chord. You can still start on a minor chord. It's okay.
Yeah, like you're allowed. That's like kind of the cool thing about music. You could do whatever you want, you know. And
Start on
I
a
just
weird
watched.
2-minor if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. There you go. I just watched. There's an Apple Music interview with Zane Lowe and Jack Antonoff.
Oh,
And
that's probably good.
no, like everybody needs to watch it because, like,
Okay.
first of all, it's incredible. Second of all, Jack Antonoff 100% has that dog in him, and it was so cool seeing like the biggest producer in the world right now and
Mhm.
how little he cares about everything other than the art, you know? Because
Yeah.
I feel like so many people like come up and they're like, well, I wrote this song like this because Max Martin wrote a song and it went like this. So I use that to make this. And hearing him talk about how he makes music, he's like, I love working in New York and I love this space that I built and I love how private it is because everybody can come here and feel like they could create freely. And for a while I wasn't his biggest fan because I was like, why'd he do that? That's weird. Why'd he do that? That's weird. But now I understand that like those choices are ultimately like what make him different and what allow his artists to feel like they're fulfilling, you know, their creative endeavors. And yeah, I think it's so important to like really get in tune with like what are you trying to say, you
For
know?
sure. I think whether you love it or hate it, you can also kind of start picking out Jack. And once you hear a Jack Antonoff like thing, you can like start hearing some of his proclivities.
Yeah.
Like and like you said, whether you like it or hate it, but it is different.
Yeah.
And it does set him apart in a sense that people tend to like.
What I will say is the latest Bleachers album is so good. It's like,
it is really good. I've just
oh
listened.
my God.
I know what you're talking.
It is so good.
Yeah. What's interesting is you said, you know, as he's talking about his space, it's like, oh, he was able to create something that allowed the artist and the songwriter to feel comfortable, to be in a space that is vulnerable, to be themselves, to allow the best thing to pour out. That to me is an art, to create a space that allows that for different people and different type, no matter what.
Yeah.
And then your expertise comes in to guide where it needs to go, but you allow them to get there.
That's why
where everybody tries to control sometimes. It's got to look like this, or it's like, as you said, I wrote this Max Martin song because Max Martin does it. It's like, yeah, but you're not Max Martin. You're, you know, Dwayne from Kansas City. Dwayne, come on. It's like, what's Dwayne from Kansas City sound like? Use the framework, but then create the thing. Let it be you. Where's you?
And what's crazy is like, I don't know. I love learning about like, you know, whatever producer that I'm a huge fan of at the moment, you know, because everybody's story is different and it's cool like hearing, you know, all the different cool pieces of wisdom that they may or may not have. But what's wild is most like super successful creatives in music all basically have like the same thought process where it's like, oh yeah, I just wanted to make something sick, or like I just wanted to make something that, you know, or make a place where like people can just be free and make fun things, because like ultimately the only way that you can have songs connect, especially if it's like super formulaic pop music, is if the feeling gets through, you know. It's like Serban charges how much per mix, and he gets so many mixes a year, not because he's the best. There's so many small mixers who are probably a lot better than Serban that we will never hear of. We hear all these songs from him simply because he mixes with feel in mind. And he makes sure that the producer and the artist's intention gets through. And because he has such a proven track record, the mix gets cleared. And it's like as simple as that.
I love that we've used the word, because I say this word a ton too, feel. Where it's just like, where people are always like, what do you mean feel? It's just like, I wrote this, and it's just like, yeah, I know, but I don't feel like this would work. And I think my feel is even heightened because like a whole bunch of licensing is all about feel, because it's happened to picture.
It's 100% feel.
And it's the most confusing thing too, for people that may have a quality song that's really good,
Yeah.
but it doesn't work for the scene because it feels off. And when you
Yeah.
say that word, it feels like it doesn't work, or I don't feel this. They go like, it's a head scratcher. And I know I felt the same way where I was
Sure.
like, what do you mean? I looked at everything and nothing's peaking and it's
Yeah.
laid out correctly. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't feel like it's the kind of sad that makes me want to put the covers over my head
Yeah.
and not hurt myself, but just kind of cry myself to sleep. That's what this scene is.
Yeah.
It's like Mike Dean.
What the-
Somebody asked Mike Dean about after Astroworld came out. He was like, they were like, "Are you aware that like it's clipping?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, I know. Whenever it clips, it feels sick, right?"
I love Mike Dean.
You
man.
know, like, dude, it's so sick. I don't know, and it's like
Homie's just doing.
at the end of the
shit.
day, like you spend all this time getting good, and then once you get there, you realize that like, oh, I'm not special. Everybody's good. The only thing that matters is my taste and how I'm able to make songs feel. You know.
That word is something that I think recently I've really gravitated toward, is the word taste. I listened to, so there's a dude I listen to. He has a podcast called Creative Pep Talk. He's Andy Miller. I don't know if you know that one at all, but he's an illustrator. He worked a lot with like Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network, and what he talks about all the time is, especially for, and this is I think something that we could probably pass on to a lot of production and songwriter people, is like, before you worry about the hard skills, develop your taste, because your taste is going to be what is consistent throughout everything. And it's then learning the hard skills learns how to make your taste a reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly
that.
That's exactly right. That's basically how it goes.
What's interesting about that, the idea of building those skills and getting to, I think where you said like everyone's good.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if everyone stays at good, if we just stay in that land, nobody kind of does like the taste thing or tries to pull beyond that, everything's vanilla.
Yeah.
It's not bad. It's not awful, but it's just like, I don't want to, I just don't want to listen to it again. And I'm not sure why. And I'll just listen to this. It's like knowing the rules to break the rules, and knowing that your experience and the things that you've particularly liked in the lens that you have seen this world, which I think we forget because sometimes we're so ingrained in the thing. It's like, hey, stop for a minute. Just remember, we're on a rock and it's spinning incredibly fast around this huge ball of sun, and there's thousands of other galaxies and who knows what other life.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're just vibing.
Cool. You have seen this planet in a particular way that no one else has. Even if we line them up, it's just a little bit off. Okay, that is your strength. Lean into that and now use that and create stuff with the framework that you have, but never lose sight of that, like that little bit of vision and the way that you see and hear things. And if you feel you should do it, do it. Don't fight that, because I see that people fight against an instinct. Like, we thought about doing this, and I'm like, awesome, but we did this instead. And it's like,
wow, great, it's boring now.
And it's like, why? And it's like,
it's boring now.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, because like part of me goes, oh, I wish they would do this, and then they mention it, and I'm like, oh, did you do it? And they're like, no, we went with this thing.
Oh, the safe option? Yeah.
Exactly. The safe option. I go, it's funny because I would have taken that, and I would have been interested to see you actually run with it, because I think it probably would get you where you want. And they go like, oh, it's funny how even when we have the skills, sometimes the amount of faith that we have in our abilities to actually see things through and take it to a level, it's not always there. We kind of do that sort of like, I don't know. I always like to think of Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, where it's like, about to get the grail, and there's just this huge dark chasm between him and stepping on like slightly solid ground. That's basically creativity. We don't think anything's there, but when we actually go, we see, something's actually holding us up, and we're okay, and we can get to the other side of what we want.
Yeah.
100%. So kind of talking a little bit more about, because I mean, I feel like your further mentorship stuff is a lot of like what we just talked about, probably. It's a lot of like follow through on like these little things where, okay, now you have 75% of the lessons done and you're technically there. Now let's like figure out the last 25% or the last 20% and that last 5%. That's all you, baby.
Yeah.
But so what do you find? And this could be broad as
Mhm.
everybody that works with you, or from like the one-on-one specific. What do you find is like the most consistent thing that people are struggling with?
You know what? I think the most consistent thing that people struggle with is okay with things being messy. We always talk about like the messy middle, the things that are tough. I think it's a lot of overthinking and not willing to write a lot of not so good things and be comfortable and okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
This perfection lens that we see everything through does no one any service. It doesn't do you, it doesn't do your co-writer, it doesn't do your mentor, and it doesn't do your well of ideas, because you end up killing them because the idea is not even formed and you're starting to say it and you're like, oh, hold back and wait until it's like I'll retweak it. And it's like, no, what is it going to do if you hold on to it just a little bit more and retweak it? Say half the shit that I've written is because also my co-writer was like blurbing out an idea and then they were like, oh, it's awful. And I was like, whoa, that was the thing.
Yeah.
What'd you do? Just say it again. Oh, it's not that good. Are you kidding me? That's my fucking favorite part of the song.
Yeah.
But getting a client into that space is being okay a little bit too with them. They have to feel very comfortable with themselves and who they are,
Yeah.
and allow that to be something that they do visibly for everyone. We don't mind maybe doing it in closed doors, or okay doing it in front of one or two individuals. But the idea of like stepping into brand new rights with people and then just being like, okay, here's my idea. It's not fully formed. I know I kind of made a little like squeak noise there, but this is the
Yeah.
idea. Getting to that space is fucking hard.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, it
that
is.
is one of our goals, to get comfortable being uncomfortable and realizing, but that's what it needs to get the thing that you are saying to me,
Dude,
you want to do.
it's super cool that you say that, because so I've started doing a thing here where there's like a bunch of songwriters here in Greenville
Yeah.
that we've talked about the Greenville to Nashville pipeline earlier.
Mhm.
Like, it's pretty strong, and like I feel like there's a lot of untapped potential here of people that just like are that way, that are like
Mhm.
struggling with the I don't feel like I am. I struggle with the putting myself out there, that part. So like I've been trying to do these writing sessions once a quarter. Well, we have like 8 to 10 people come and write a song together,
That's
and
awesome.
then everybody goes around and pitches an idea. The people that gravitate towards an idea, they form a little group, and then they try to finish that song. We try to finish as many songs as we can in an 8-hour period. So it's
That's amazing.
basically, which is a super cool thing, because there's a time limit on it, there's no room for being like scared.
We'll reschedule this later. We'll
Yeah,
set up another Zoom date.
exactly. There's
None
no
of that
room to
shit.
be scared, because I have people
Yeah.
coming in from out of state to do these like to do this, like, so songwriter friends of mine are coming in from Raleigh, they're coming up from Atlanta, like, and
That's
so
amazing.
especially some of the younger people that aren't used to being in these situations, like some of those guys are perfectly fine with being whatever, but then you have these newer people, it puts them in these scenarios of like, oh, I can just screw up and be fine, and I can pitch a half-baked idea and somebody be like, I think this is really, really cool, we need to tweak like a verse or something right here, or maybe rewrite this verse, but the rest of it, let's freaking work on this thing, man. We can knock this out in an hour or two. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going. And it's the same idea, it's a similar idea, at least, to there's an author, Cal Newport. You know who Cal Newport is? He wrote So Good They Can't Ignore You, Deep Work.
Yes.
So obviously doctorate at MIT, like, prolific writer.
Mm-hmm.
He has this rule where he talks about where when he's writing, which is it's all the next one will be the one that's perfect. The next one will be the one that's perfect. So if I can just get through this one, the next one will be the one that's perfect. And that's how he wrote Deep Work. Was like, the next one will be my New York Times bestseller or whatever. and then he wrote one of the greatest books. That's how, when he wrote Digital Minimalism, it's like, the next one will be my New York Times bestseller and whatever. And then that obviously skyrocketed and did huge numbers. And it's like being okay with, like, it's almost fooling yourself into being okay with it a little bit. That's his way of doing it, which is interesting.
which I love, because
Yeah.
that's the thing too. Half the things in the battles of songwriting that we also see in Clyde's, it's just like, it's in our head too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when people are like, what's the worst enemy? It's you.
Yeah.
It's just like, just what you told me. It's so, like you said, da da da, sounds so negative and defeated. It's just like, you're already killing the thing when it's barely alive.
Yeah.
And you're saying it's the industry or this thing. It's you.
Yeah.
You're doubting yourself. And it is hard to, if we can shift that mindset and be like, you know what? It wasn't that bad. It's not my greatest thing, but you know what? I'm getting a little bit better. If we can, it's such a small, like, little directional shift to take. It seems like a small thing that, people are like, oh, you're nitpicking on words, but it's like, it's amazing how much of a fraction of a degree can change our trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like either from just going to where we want or being wildly off. I forget which book I was reading, and it was the story of like the same thing. It was a plane. They didn't realize the plane was like barreling towards a mountain because they were just a degree off.
Oh God.
And it ended up just being like it crap. Unfortunately, I forget which plane, but it was like, it was just purely an instrument thing. It was just a degree off. They read it wrong, and that just caused the plane to just completely veer off. Now, I'm not saying that everyone's going to explode and their careers are going to be doomed to failure in a mountain, but it's like, the one thing that I've learned over time is don't be afraid to pivot a little bit, change a little bit. It just move a tiny bit, because it does make a huge difference. Why do people talk about mindset shit a lot? Because it matters.
Yeah.
The people that do really well, they're not better than you. They're not, their self-worth isn't better, more or less. It's, they've learned that how they talk about themselves does matter. So when they're talking to themselves, it's encouraging.
Yeah.
The best piece of advice I got from someone was get a picture of yourself when you were like little, like 2 or 3. And imagine all the self-talk that we do throughout the day to ourselves. Imagine doing it to that 2-year-old.
Yeah, that's rough.
You would be the shittiest person, because it'd be like looking at a kid like, why is that guy telling that kid like, you fucked up, come on, get your shit together. No, it's just like, you'd be like, hey, you're trying, that wasn't bad, don't worry, we're gonna get through this, we're gonna think about it, and you're gonna crush it next time, let's just keep on going.
Yeah,
it's hard to get into that place.
Well, I would argue the people that make it whatever that needs to look like for them, and that's a whole nother can of worms, but make it in whatever they, in the traditional sense of make it, whereas like they are feeling fulfilled by their work and monetarily it is at least paying for their living. I would say that the people that have achieved that learned the pivot. Those are the people that started, didn't care, and then they found their way because of their ability to slightly pivot. And because like the professionals at pivoting are the ones that end up making it, because then when you have things like a global pandemic, when you have things like, even if harkening back to the early 2000s, you have things like the internet age where everything was written form and suddenly everything's digital. You have the social media age, everything's blogs and an internet website, and now everything's social media. Like those abilities to pivot can keep you in the long term like success rather than the short term, pay to win, whatever.
Dude, when you're saying like pivoting, especially like pre-pandemic. So when I left my job, it was around like 2018. And I told them I'm starting this new thing online in which I'm teaching people and I'm doing coaching. And they were like, oh, geez. And then for about a year and a half, I had it set up. And I felt like, teaching clients one-on-one, doing it that way. And it was awesome. And then the pandemic happened. And I realized I had a year or so practice of Zoom and navigating and knowing it and having all my systems ready. And I was like, wow, you know what? There was a period where I almost thought about not changing. I thought about just staying there. I'm so glad I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm glad I made it. Seemed risky, but actually the risk was actually not doing it.
Yeah. You have a 2-year runway on everybody else that's now trying to pivot into that world.
Exactly. It's interesting, but yeah, it's the pivot and just being willing to I don't know, take a chance on yourself and also believe in your capabilities. One of the first conferences I went to, it was a guy that worked for this amazing company, Team One in LA, and they do like, he oversaw all like the composition of like, ads and everything. I was like, that's a badass. I was like, how did you get that? And he was like, I could explain it to you, but it wouldn't make sense. And I was like, oh, that's great. Thanks. Okay. What do you mean? I was like, that's it. That's me. He was like, here, because I was here for a little bit, but then I went here and then I was over here. But then I just felt like this wasn't my job. And so I actually ended up doing it. And what he described was this weird. And he was like, in your life, you're going to do lots of little pivots. And he was like, you're going to be here, you're going to be there. It will make sense to you, but no one else.
100%.
I was like, well, damn, he was right.
Yeah. And I think creatively, like, a lot of the times the biggest problem is like it's almost like people are afraid to just like focus on the things that they love, you know, because like I don't know,
let that be the guiding light of your pivots.
Yeah, like I don't know, I feel like so many people end up making less than stellar music.
Why do you think they hide what they love? Not to throw that vague question, because I'm like, that's a really good, that's a good thing, because it's like, if you love it,
they don't trust their intuition, they don't trust their taste, they don't trust
they have not developed their taste enough to believe themselves.
Yeah, so it very quickly turns into that thing where it's like, oh, I just made this thing because I love it, but like, that one Ariana Grande song really wouldn't do that, so I'm gonna change it. And then it just kind of turns into like phoned in decision after phoned in decision, and now you have 80% of my Instagram ads right now. And I think that like it's just that way. Like, remember when we were talking to Aaron Pace, and he was like, one day, I forget how exactly the story goes, but effectively he was complaining about this project that he was working on, and his wife looks at him and she's like, so why are you doing it? And he was like, oh shit. And what's funny is I had the same exact experience with my soon-to-be wife, and it's just like, yeah, we could just like do things that we like instead of doing things that we don't like, whether it's accepting projects, whether it's like a career choice, whether it's where you live, whether it's whether or not that bridge should be in the song, and like, I don't know. I
think it's a wife instinct. It's a wife instinct, because what you just said right there, my now wife, it was my girlfriend at the time, when I wanted to leave the job, I didn't say it out loud for a while. I just kind of went through it. And then she just looked at me one day and she was like, I don't think you're happy, and I think you want to leave. And I was like, no. And then I thought about it, and I was like, she might be right. And then one day, of course, I act like it was the idea I thought of. You know what? I'm not happy, and I think I might want to leave. But exactly. It is interesting to see
that. Of course, honey. Of course. You always know.
Are we oblivious, too, of like how we're acting, too? Like, just how we're holding ourselves, where the people that do love us see, like, you don't look happy. You do not look like you're having a good time. You say you are, but man, it is how you're holding yourself and what you're saying. I think you want to not do that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that conversation with Aaron kind of stemmed from like another conversation of like being okay with saying no. And which is like a whole nother thing, but that was the transition from him. And then Josh had this similar thing with his conversation of like, this is the transition where they both went from working in like primarily heavy music into like wanting to do, I think for Aaron it was like pop rock music, and for Josh it was like leaning into like I don't know, it's like more pop, hip hop related music.
I've had many phases.
Yeah, you've had many phases, but actually for you, Josh, it was I'm going to do heavy music into I'm going to explore what it looks like to produce everything else, basically, which was big for you.
Yeah, I don't know, because like I wasn't that good. I was like, well, I have to get good.
Well, also, to be fair, Josh, you walked into a situation where the guy you were working with had just broken Teddy Swims, and he had just bought this studio, and he had like 3 other artists that were breaking at the same time. So
that's amazing.
Very true. But Yeah, I don't know. I think that most people's problem is literally as simple as like they just do things that they don't love, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
Too
like,
long, and they aren't real with themselves about it, like what Mike said.
yeah, you know, I don't know. But then again, like I'm also like sort of biased because I've I really appreciate a lot of music that isn't perfect, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
so like I'm really fascinated by the artists that like can like really get messy and like still pull it off and still make it feel like a proper, you know, professionally done
I
song.
think Breakins is a really good example of that for
Yeah,
us.
well I just mentioned Mickey and like he is
Yeah.
so good. He's so good. And I was
Mm-hmm.
listening to the mixes in the car today, and I was like, what's crazy is that if this was my song, I would have mixed this completely different and it would not have felt nearly as cool. Because
It,
like there's certain parts where it's just like, oh wow, that guitar is like super mid rangey and it's way
Yeah.
louder than the vocal, and I would never do that. And it's like, well, that's why he's way cooler than me. You know?
Yeah. Or that one what's that one 1975 song where they that you were talking about with the guitar like
Oh yeah,
um
the Give Yourself a Try.
mm,
They ripped the is it Blue Monday? No, it's Disorder by
it's Disorder.
Joy Division. Yeah.
oh,
They
joy.
ripped that guitar and it's just
Yeah,
like
yeah. If
Oh,
you listen to it, you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's
yeah,
the same."
it's the same thing, and except it's not as cool because it isn't as out of tune as Joy
Yeah,
Division.
yeah. Yeah, Joy Division was way more out of tune, but
Yeah.
it's like it's funny you mentioned that. Now I'm hearing it. I'm like, you're right. That's almost like what is it? It's I don't know if it's Supermassive Black Hole, Muse.
Mhm.
The bend that they have is the same as Blondie's "Call Me."
Mm,
Call Me.
Yeah. Oh
It's
yeah,
yeah.
just
it
like every
is.
time I sit there and hear it,
Wow.
I'm just like, "Call Me." I'm just like, I guess like
Yeah.
it was in his head, and he was just like, "I'll just bend right here," and I'm like, how did Blondie not go like, "Hello,
Yeah.
call me"?
Yeah.
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 But I think both of the situations are really good talking about the taste conversation of
Yeah.
people being able to go, "Oh, I have this thing that I love, this music that speaks to me in
Yeah.
some way that has I've developed my taste in this way." Um and now I'm going to use that somehow and not be
Mm-hmm.
afraid, because I mean, Josh, for that Joy Division song to be an influence and them to say, all right, we're going to make the brightest, grossest sounding electric guitar and what is a pop band, and it's going to be a number one, let's go. And and they did it somehow.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
just full sent it and people thought it was cool.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a video of them breaking down the stems to their last album that they
Mhm.
did
Mm-hmm.
with Jack, and there's some cool stuff in there. There's some really cool stuff in there.
Yeah, there
I
was a
love
good
it, dude. They were
that
like,
was a
yeah,
cool
we
little
spent
breakdown.
like days recording like cello and trying to play guitar with a bow, which is actually really hard to do. And so like this is like an hour long piece of audio, and we just use this like little 3 second clip. You know, they're doing all kinds of weird stuff. It's cool.
Uh, so Mike, maybe to start landing this, I'd love
Yeah.
to get some music recs from you, or podcast recs, or any kind of listening recs
Yeah.
from you. All right. So,
Okay.
so I got two different categories of things. This is something that we do on the podcast where I try to I think us as music industry people, we tend to do a really bad job of listening to new music sometimes, or
Mm.
something different, or
Oh
we get
yeah.
kind of stuck in a lane. So we're trying to build like a cool little playlist for people to check out if they ever get stuck in a rut. So I would love two options from you. One
Okay.
is something that you have just been stoked on lately, just
Yeah.
like unabashedly just stoked on. And then another thing is something that you find that you feel is underrated.
Oh yeah. I could. There's lots.
Okay.
So let's underrated. There's an artist named Karuk that I think is by far a fantastic singer songwriter. Um, she produces it to herself, and the layers and the sounds and the vulnerability that are included in her music is I just think we need more of this, because like when I see it, I hear vulnerability, I hear exactly all the things, and I'm just like, oh, it's just amazing.
How do you spell it?
CROO. I think it's just Karuk. Yeah. Yes. Hold on. Karuk. I'm terrible with spelling. But she had. There was a song that went. Hold on. COROOK. Yeah, COROOK.
What's the song?
So the song I would say is Not Doing Well.
Okay.
I love the Spotify cover.
Yeah,
with the frog
I'm not
hat.
doing well. Yeah. Because they do just such fantastic something lyrically. I think the honesty is very, very they had a song blow up called If I Were a Fish, that is also really, really good. And also It's Okay kind of blew up on TikTok. So that's what I would say is underrated, and I think people should listen more to Karuk. I am not ashamed, unabashedly proud to say I am still motherfucking loving Blink-182's album. I will sit here, I will listen to it. I am happy to say I have fanboyed completely out. I grabbed my guitar. Yeah, I completely fanboyed all over the place with Blink's album, grabbed my guitar, started learning the parts, was listening to the tones, and I was just like, ooh, okay. And how bright I know everybody complained about the master that was like a bright and I was like, I fucking loved it. So
I think Ryan Hewitt mixed this album.
Yeah, he did.
That's another one that I love Ryan Hewitt, which makes sense because Ryan Hewitt, he worked on their self-titled album with Jerry Finn, spent so much time with Jerry, and he's done lots of things, and I've seen interviews, and just a cool guy in general that I would love to hang out with.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. Those are some great recs, honestly. Those are some great recs, honestly.
Yeah.
You also have a podcast that you do on the regularly. So why don't you go through the socials and where people can check out you out and find you and all of the things?
All of the things. So for songwriting, just go to songwritingforguitar.com. There's tons of free resources. That's the best place where you can listen to all 107 episodes of the podcast, including the trailer that was 3 minutes. Also, too, you can go. I released the book back in the beginning of September. It's called The Songwriting Guitarist. You can pick it up for free. Just pay for the shipping. Just go to songwritingforguitar.com and you can get that as well. You can even check out some of their free resources when, how to navigate co-writes, DAW 101, different areas that you're looking to achieve in songwriting. There's a resource for you there. You can follow us on Instagram at Songwriting for Guitar. You can follow me at Mike_Meiers. And yeah, those are all the places that you can find the stuff that we do.
Dude, Mike, thank you so much for this conversation, man. It's been a killer hour of just some dope chats. And me and Josh get philosophical like this with each other sometimes, but rarely do we get this philosophical with a guest. So, dude, I thank you for bringing that energy today.
No, thanks you guys for having me. This was so much fun.
Yeah, man. Josh, thanks for hanging out with us. Listeners, thanks so much for listening. Follow Mike, Songwriting for Guitar. Make sure you're subscribed, like, share, comment, all that stuff. Leave your favorite emoji just because I think it'd be fun. And we will see you guys in the next one. Later.
Don't forget to smash that like button.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast. If you could take the time to like, subscribe. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other audio platform, go ahead and make sure you're subscribed and also leave a rating and a review. It helps the show get out to new people, and we're trying to grow every single week. Once again, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast, and we'll see you next week.